Have you ever, ever been in an office where everyone agrees on the temperature? Yeah, me neither. We all kind of think there's this one perfect number for the thermostat, right? But what if that whole idea is just wrong? Today, we're going to dive into some really fascinating research that shows why our buildings are basically fighting a losing battle against human nature, and how a much smarter approach to comfort can make us all happier and, get this, save a ton of energy. The thermostat. It's the source of so many passive-aggressive notes and silent sweater-related conflicts. Is it the person who's always freezing? The one who's always sweating? This daily struggle isn't just some minor annoyance. It actually points to a really fundamental flaw in how we design our spaces. Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll start with that all-too-familiar thermostat war. Then we'll unpack the old, kind of rigid idea of comfort that got us into this mess. Then we'll get to the good stuff, a much more flexible idea called the adaptive comfort model. We'll look at a huge office study in Japan that put this theory to the test and uncovered some really surprising limits to how we adapt. And finally, we'll see what this all means for creating smarter and frankly better buildings for all of us. First up, the battleground, the office thermostat. You know the scene, right? One person is practically mummified in a blanket in the middle of July, while their colleague 2 desks over has a personal fan blasting them in the face. This isn't just about people being picky. It's a symptom of a much, much bigger design problem. And here it is. This is the core of the problem. For decades, our buildings have been engineered around finding one single magical temperature that's supposed to make everybody comfortable. This whole approach basically treats people like objects, just sitting passively in a climate-controlled box. And as we all know from experience, that's just not how people work. Not at all. So where in the world did this idea of a single perfect temperature even come from? Let's take a look at the science that's been running the show. It's all rooted in a model that has been the industry standard for more than 50 years. It's called the Predicted Mean Vote Model, or PMV for short. Now, it's this super complex formula. It takes into account things like air temperature, humidity, even the clothes you're wearing, all to predict how an average group of people will feel. But the key word here is predict. It assumes people are passive, that they don't react, they don't adjust. It's a static model for a very dynamic world. This slide just lays out the difference perfectly. On the left, you've got the old static model. It assumes we're passive, there's one ideal temperature, and the environment never changes. Then, on the right, you have the adaptive model, which flips all of that on its head. It recognizes that we are active participants, that comfort is actually a flexible range, and that, our environment is constantly changing. And this brings us to the hero of our story, the adaptive comfort model. This theory recognizes a simple truth that the old models completely ignored. We don't just sit there and take the temperature, we adapt. So how do we adapt? Well, we do it all the time without even thinking about it. We throw on a sweater when we're chilly. We crack open a window to get a breeze going. Our bodies literally acclimatize to the heat of the summer and the cold of the winter. And, just as important, our expectations play a huge role. We sort of expect to feel cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. And that psychological shift actually changes how we feel. Okay, but is this just a nice theory, or does it actually hold up in the real world? Well, to find out, a team of researchers in Japan conducted this massive, multi-year study to see how people really felt in their offices, all year round. This was a huge undertaking. Over 49 different survey sessions, they collected more than 2,700 sets of data from over 500 office workers. They measured everything you can think of: air temp, humidity, airspeed, while asking people, hey, how do you feel right now? What are you wearing? Do you have a window open or the AC on? And what makes this study even more interesting is the cultural backdrop. Since 2005, the Japanese government has been promoting these campaigns called Cool Biz and Warm Biz. The whole idea is to encourage workers to dress for the season. Lighter clothes in summer, warmer layers in winter, all in an effort to save energy. So it's basically a nationwide experiment in adaptive comfort already in progress. But here's where things get really fascinating. As the researchers started digging into all that data, they found that while people definitely adapted, there were clear limits. And one of the most surprising discoveries had to do with language itself. Just think about that for a second. When you feel slightly warm, is that a good thing or a bad thing? In English, it usually leans towards being a little uncomfortable, right? But what the researchers found was that a direct translation of the standard comfort scale, well, it didn't quite work in Japanese.
So if you look at the standard international scale on the left, a +1 is defined as slightly warm. But the researchers realized that for the Japanese participants, a +1 feeling was actually closer to what they would call slightly hot. Now, this seems like a small difference in words, but it points to a much bigger idea about the cultural meaning behind them.
This quote from the study really gets to the heart of it. In Japanese, the words for warm, that's dan, and cool, ryo, actually imply a pleasant, comfortable feeling. It's only when you get to hot, which is shore, or cold, kan, that the feeling becomes uncomfortable. This amazing little nuance is completely lost in a direct translation, and it shows how culture literally shapes our perception of comfort. So this whole language thing was a huge clue for the scientists. It helped them refine their hypothesis. They predicted that our ideal comfort temperature doesn't just go up in a straight line as the outdoors gets hotter. Instead, they thought it would follow more of an S-curve, leveling off when it gets really hot or really cold. And you know what? The data proved them absolutely right. Just look at this graph. Every single one of those dots is a person's stated comfort temperature. You can see they don't form a straight line at all. They create this really distinct S-curve. This tells us that our ability to adapt works great within a certain range, in this case between about 23.5 and 26.6 degrees Celsius. But once you get outside that range to the really hot or cold extremes, our adaptability just plain hits a wall. So why does that S-curve flatten out at the ends? This graph tells the story. Look at the yellow dots for clothing. In those mild middle temperatures, people are actively changing what they wear. Same for the black curve showing open windows. But when it gets really, really cold, you can only put on so many sweaters. And when it gets super hot, opening a window just lets more hot air in. Our natural adaptations have limits, and that's exactly where the curve flattens out. Okay, so what's the big takeaway here? What do we do with all this? Well, this research really points the way toward a future of smarter buildings, buildings that work with our natural ability to adapt instead of fighting against it. The key lesson is actually simple, but it's also incredibly powerful. Instead of wasting a massive amount of energy trying to maintain one rigid temperature, we can design buildings that embrace a wider comfort range. This doesn't just slash energy bills, it gives people more control over their own space. Things like windows they can actually open or smart vents. And study after study shows that when people have that control, their satisfaction and productivity go way up. For decades, we've been the ones who've had to adapt to our buildings. We've brought in the sweaters and the personal fans, and we've fought the thermostat wars. But all this research suggests there's a much better way. It asks a pretty simple question. Instead of us constantly having to adapt to our rigid, inefficient buildings, isn't it finally time our buildings started adapting to us?